If you guys would join me, we want to thank our panel. So we had Laura Presslin from Microsoft, Jennifer Brown from Medtronic, Kalpana Sundar from PayPal, and Nolan Goddard from PayPal.
Women are the ones who often lead cultural change. And because we're already talking about diversity of gender a lot, we have a real leadership position to make sure that everybody else, all those other diverse groups, are also being brought into the discussion. So I feel like we should be the leaders, and like we're trying to partner more with the other ERGs as well, because we already got people to listen to our message, so we need to use that kind of voice that we've, and the platform that we've earned to do the same for everybody else.
Yeah, that's good.
We need white men to lead the change, especially because, at least in this geography, and most of people in power are white men. So if we wanted to change the status quo, we need the help of white men. So everyone, not only them, but anyone actually. Right. So it's very crucial to build allyship or alliances with all groups, but also have connections and influence people in charge, people in power, because they will have definitely more leverage to make the change happen than the minority.
Yeah.
For me, sorry, someone said salt. I thought you were going to ask a question. For me, allyship is about timing. It's not as impactful if after this meeting I say, you know, Jennifer, I really wasn't comfortable when someone talked over you. I saw you. It's okay. That's not as helpful as in the meeting saying, I think Jennifer was talking. Can we finish that thought before we move on? So even little acts like that, that's allyship. Other things I do that aren't about racial diversity and all the other diversities is I always use a mic. You know, there's a lot of abilities and different abilities that are unseen. So I always use a mic. When I use our online collaboration tools, I turn on live captioning because not everybody can hear or can understand the spoken word as well as they can. If they read it, they understand it better. So there's just a lot of little inclusivity tricks that aren't about race or religion or color and are just about how to work with people with different abilities. But timing is important. If you see something that you think isn't cool, just bring it up. Just don't make it weird.
Yeah. And be okay if it's a little weird. Be okay with that. All right, very good. So I want to be able to turn it over to you all. You don't have to get up. I'll come to you. So if you have a question and you want to raise your hand, I'll bring the mic over, and we will allow you guys to ask some questions.
So my name is Ellen Quackenbush, and I'm wondering, how do you create allies? Do you wait for people to volunteer, or do you go out and recruit those people in power? Like, how about that old white guy?
There's actually a bunch of research on allyship, and we talk about it in meetings. And not just me, but we have a diversity inclusion lead for Microsoft who gives a whole presentation on the importance of allyship. So you can go listen to some great TED Talks on it. You can put it in your email signature with a little link to that. And then I find that the most effective thing I do is just model it. Because when people see people have the courage to model it, then they're like, oh, that's what that looks like. Okay, I can do it too. And that almost, to me, works better than some presentation that we've watched. So all of us has an opportunity to model and be role models.
I think just to add on to that, yes, modeling, of course, is something that we as leaders have to do. I try to put that as a goal because PayPal's goal is inclusion and wellness. So if all of us have to really live by that value within the company, then we have to have allies who support us and help us through that journey. Making sure that we have that as each of our individual goals and working towards that goal becomes extremely important. I think another thing is being your own self, right? Being authentic about it and being open about it, I think pays off. Again, not just at work. I think I want to touch on this from a family perspective as well. Finding allies within your own family is also important. Especially when you know that you're not able to give the time that you would love to give to your family. Because you need people to support you, and it's okay to go and ask for help. I've personally made sure that I've kept all my friends and cousins in the good books so that they can come and babysit my child when I have to attend to something at work. So to me, it's like, do it everywhere.
That's great. So be an ally, model being an ally, but also model being your authentic self. That's good. All right, who else has a question?
Hi. So I am in the process of chairing our diversity and inclusion effort, first ever effort at Hypertherm, and looking at ERG groups. I'd love your thoughts on programs that exist, how you structure that. Are there monthly meetings? Are there in between? Are there virtual teams? Just any advice you have for someone starting an ERG in a company very early on in the learning curve for D&I.
I can tell you about our experience at PayPal. I used to run our ERG for women called Unity Women at PayPal. And we had different programs that were run by different program chapters. And so, for example, a mentorship program, a shadow program where a woman would shadow a man or a woman more senior to learn from observation on different leadership traits. We had panels on different topics. We had a group also for kids to learn how to code very early. Lots of programs like this, and we were structured in a steering committee, and where we would meet on a regular basis to talk about all the actions we would do, and then we would work with the communication group of PayPal to make sure our communication was propagated across the company on the events and invite everyone to participate. But we had a structure of a steering committee. As a one person, you cannot run everything. So, and you'll see most of it is usually volunteer work. So you need to motivate people to give their time beyond their job's duties, which sometimes is a challenge. But also very inspiring when you see what you give to the community and what they tell you about what they received. That's quite inspiring. So yeah, I would say structure it and then have those allies go to the senior leadership that can help fund initiatives. We used to have budget given by different leaders. Also come to our events and speak. Actually now at PayPal we have different leaders of the company being the champions of every single initiative. So you have champions for the women's group, the champions for the Latinx, etc. So it's a message that's powerful because it shows that the company cares and at the highest level. And make sure also you can have conversations with the management so that your employees can participate to those events. Because sometimes it can be hard, you have so much to do, so you don't have time. But the company culture should acknowledge that it's important enough that people can participate in those events.
I'll add a little something. So setting it up is great. The hard part is making it stick. So what I find really effective is make sure you're distinguishing, because sometimes they become BMW sessions. Everybody knows what BMW stands for? Bitching, moaning, and whining. Yeah. So you have to make sure that you're keeping a line between what people just want to talk about and some stuff that's actionable, because you want to be able to show that you're doing something with this information. And sometimes these are not amazing actions. These are things like everybody in this employee resource group has a mentor. Everybody in this group has had 10 cups of coffee with somebody they didn't know who is different than them. They can be super simple, but you want to make sure that each time when you come back, you've got progress against metrics that you can control. The other thing I like to do is bring other ERGs together, because you find that the ERGs are all talking about their own thing individually, but we're talking amongst ourselves about wouldn't it be great if, and you band together across the ERGs, and then you get to go to upper management and say, these 6 different employee resource groups all want the same thing, so we would like XYZ. And then you just band together because there's strength in numbers. 2 tips.
That's good. One thing last year that I'm over on this side now, I keep popping around. But one thing that was shared last year, also, if I could add, is Tara from Nissan said that, I keep bringing her up because she had so many good points, but she said that once they got it going and they had all these different like groups and veteran and all that, that they required that everybody sit in on, I believe, 2 ERG meetings a year, one for one group, one for another group that they don't normally belong to. So like once they're up and going, also making sure that it's a safe space where allies can come in who are not normally a part of that. And that helps as well to hear. And if you want to regularly attend, you could, but you had to go to some different groups. So that might be something once it really gets going. Who else has a question for our panel? All right, let me come this way.
How are your organizations thinking about diversity versus inclusion? They typically get lumped in together and are very, very different things. Most companies are very good at the former and not so good at the latter. So I'd just love to hear your thoughts about that.
So I think you might have had a nice quote in your presentation this morning about that. Basically saying HR does a really good job of bringing the diversity in-house, but then we have to be really careful that we don't stifle them with a company culture that might have been based on a different makeup of people. And so you have to, and I know Hillary, who's not here, but who's also co-founder of this group, is very passionate about making sure people to be included, they need to feel like they can show up at work as their true self. Mm-hmm. So with things like unconscious bias, you can address, I think, the people not always feeling like they're allowed to be themselves in the office or to be themselves at work. So I think we have to build that kind of safe space inside the organization to say, you want to wear a nose ring? Good for you. We need to you want to do whatever you want to do. If you're contributing, you're valued. We don't care what you do, personally, or I mean, not that we don't care, but it's not, sorry, that sounded wrong. It's not that we don't see you differently because of the choices you've made or where you're from or what your preferences are. And we just have to, kind of back to what Laura's saying, we have to walk the talk. We have to make it okay for people to show up as themselves. And that's all we can do. I mean, that's how I see what we can really do. And women have been getting that microphone literally to have that conversation a lot, and we just need to make sure that everybody who comes into the organization feels the same and feels the same environment and doesn't feel like the culture, which is an unwritten word within inside of a company of how we expect people to behave, needs to be updated a little.
I would add that it needs to be very conscious, and I really like the expression of conscious inclusion versus unconscious bias, because it takes a lot of effort. It's not going to be natural. As human, we have biological needs to be included, but not to include others. So it requires an extra effort to do so. But we can have rules and processes and procedures inside of companies to make that better. So typically you can have processes around reviewing if everyone had a fair assessment and evaluation. There are typical things you can do around that, studying the vocabulary that's used and see if it's biased towards a certain group of people or not. You can also make sure that you review if all your employees had stretch assignments, opportunities, are they all being looked at for promotions? If and be weird maybe in the room and say, hey, how come we don't have any women on the list to be promoted or for the third year in a row, something like that, right? So bring the topic around processes. So that everyone has a fair chance and see that there is fairness, to your point this morning on your keynote. Otherwise, there is a threat, a perceived threat that you cannot progress in that company. So I think there is a lot you can do as an organizational level to make inclusion more palpable. But it needs to be organized, it needs to be conscious. It's not going to happen on its own.
So for me, inclusivity is the same thing as empathy. Because if my team all believes that we all have the right intention, we forgive each other a lot more quickly. So we use one technique to drive empathy, which is called a check-in. Again, it sounds weird, but like the third time you do it, it gets just people look forward to it. So the check-in is 3 questions. The first question is, how are you feeling right now? Then usually you ask a business question in the middle. And then the third question is, what's distracting you? So the last time we did this, a new team just got reorged into my team. So the first question was, how are you feeling right now? The second question was, how are you feeling about the direction of the team? And the third question is, what's distracting you? And you get some really interesting answers. And sometimes they're like, I'm feeling really scared right now because I don't really know what my job is. And so I feel like the team's going in the wrong way. What's distracting you? Well, my mother-in-law's in the hospital and I've got this going on. So they give a very personal story about what's going on. It builds connection and empathy about, wow, Bill's not just being a jerk. He's actually really sick because he just had some surgery that went badly and he has to go back in and get it fixed again. Poor Bill. Bill, can we need anything? So the question you ask after you go through the check-in is usually, I'll model it for you. Jennifer, thank you for sharing that. Is there anything we can do that would make it better? And you have to practice that question a little bit so it doesn't sound like you're just saying the same thing over and over, so you change the words around. But it's amazing what people will ask for, and it goes right to the theme of vulnerability. I could really help. It would really help if you could move that 4 p.m. meeting to tomorrow morning. That would really help. Done. So it just develops empathy, which leads to inclusivity.
That's good because it's almost like diversity. Again, that's where for people who don't care about diversity or inclusion, I should say, you could almost force diversity on them from a PR perspective or whatever. But inclusion, again, that's where it is. It's the heart issue. It's, do you empathize? Do you care? You can't make other people, but we can model it. But that's where, for me, it's almost like, how can I push diversity? Like, if I can tell that you don't care, I can at least bring up, okay, who's on the list, or who works at our company, or who's in the speaker lineup for me. What's the diversity in our speakers, et cetera. So
I've been lucky that I haven't found anybody who really just doesn't care.
most don't.
Because I take care of them
don't
in
not care.
other ways, if you know what I mean.
Cut them off. No, most people do, and I think it's also practice and exposure. Because again, it's intentional. Like you were saying, it has to be a conscious decision. So that's good. That's good. Who else has a question?
Hello. Sorry about asking for the salt here. I think you addressed really good points now. Let's say we want to implement this inclusion as a strategy within the company. You already have your buy-in by the CEO. What will be the structure that you will present? What are the bones of this strategy? If you can address, like, let's say 4 points, we need to have this, and this to be a good strategy, implementable, that you can follow through.
You need a mantra. Because you need to be able to explain what this is. So, we're going to have lots of good answers. The piece I'll add is just something as simple as model, coach, care. You want to model the behavior that you want to see. You want to coach people who don't do it the way you think it needs to be done and help them learn. And then you need to care and show that you have that empathy. So there's all kinds of different ways you can set up a diversity and inclusion program. But if you're not landing it in something that's simple, that people are like, oh, right, model, coach, care. Do the things I'm supposed to do, help others be better, and show empathy. Without something like that, it doesn't become real. It becomes a PowerPoint deck that you have to review quarterly versus something you live every day.
And I would add on the caring part that caring is also measuring. So you can measure your progress. If it's more qualitative, you can have surveys and see if the feeling amongst your employees is getting better or worse over time. And if it's more like quantifiable, then track it, measure it. Diversity is more and easier to track than inclusion, typically. but track it and see the progress over the years. You can also track, your retention versus your attrition ratio and which population it's impacting. If all your attrition is coming from minorities, then probably it says something about inclusion. Have exit interviews, try to have insights, then have goals for the companies. I'm not saying necessarily hard goals, but at least goals, aspirational goals, where we should be X and we should be Y, and track and measure against those goals. There is almost no other segment of the business where you don't have goals and you don't measure against those goals, right? You have sales goals and you track them. What is your revenue? It's not like everything is aspirational and nobody tracks. So that should be also something that you track to see what is the reality, not an imagined reality, and then if you make progress or not.
I think in addition to all of this, one thing that I would add is having an open conversation with folks around diversity and inclusion. I specifically love this quote from our CEO. He always says this: diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice. So remembering this every single day and making sure that we remind each other of this. And maybe if people don't buy into it, having a conversation with them on why they think it is not okay to do this and modeling to show them it is worth it, I think will go a long way. I have this philosophy in head. You can teach somebody something, they can learn by experience, and the other way is they can probably read something and learn about it. So personally, what goes a long way is if you experience it, you'll never forget it. You'll remember it forever. So trying to be the person helping them learn by experience, I think will be the best gift that we can get to encourage inclusion within the organizations.
And then just maybe to add one other point, so most companies have some sort of code of conduct, what's acceptable type of behavior towards your customers, to your coworkers, et cetera. And if you can, make sure that there's wording in that code of conduct about treating each other with respect, essentially, and that we don't discriminate on any level, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, anything along those lines. And it makes it weird because people like, oh, why is that written? But if it's written in the code of conduct, then that is what we're told as part of our organization is acceptable. And if you're not willing to follow that, then you're in the wrong place.
That's great. All right, we have time for one more question. Who would like to ask the last one? All right.
Hi, I'd like to thank all of you for your time today. This has been very informative. And to kind of finish it out, as champions of this cause, do you experience burnout in that effort? And if so, how do you handle it? And if not, why do you think that is that you don't feel tired after pushing this cause?
I'm going to start with this. And I'm going to speak to it both from a work-life perspective as well as a personal life perspective. And I'll start with the personal life first. So I think culture and confrontation of cultures play a very big role in this. I'm fortunate to be part of this generation because I think we've come a long way in changing the way we think. But when I look at 2 generations back, my mom was working, but my grandmothers were not. All of them have had great influence on my life, but it takes a lot of coaching and remessaging and messaging within the family to get them to buy into this. It's not just at work. Because we've all been in this mindset of, hey, you know what, this is the division of work. You do this, this is what you're supposed to do. Changing that and fighting for it does cause burnout. I'm not going to say it doesn't, but I think it's important for us to be the models for the next generations. I want my child to look at me, and probably women and parents in general, I'm not going to say women, working parents of this generation, to at least know how to live their lives in the future. So I do get stressed out because I feel like I'm arguing to a wall sometimes. But I also think it is important because it's my responsibility to guard the next generation from not knowing incorrect information. So it does pay off at the end, so it's worth spending the time. In professional life, I think we all spoke to that. Sometimes I think modeling, yes, if you've fully bought into it and you're actually living your life by what you say, then it's not going to burn you out. But coaching sometimes does burn you out, because it's okay if you're doing it with 1 or 2 people, but if you end up doing it with hundreds of them and you're repeating the same thing over and over again, we're all human beings here. So sometimes we get very demotivated as well. But I think we should not give up. That's my only message.
I would add, find groups to support you, because you will need to be resourced yourself. Because yes, sometimes it's really exhausting, but maybe you can have a group of close friends or advisors or mentors or whomever speaks to your heart, but people will nourish you for the long run. Like thinking this is not a race, this is a marathon. And for all cultural change, it takes years, decades, centuries. So we know we're in a long haul for that, right? And then also celebrate the mini victories. Be conscious of the moments where you're really enjoying what you're doing, because there will be time you're exhausted. Like, what am I doing? I'm fighting against. But those happen. So savor them all along the way. And sometimes you'll have someone acknowledge you and say, hey, thank you for this mentorship program. Thanks to you, I was promoted, or something like that, right? So savor that. Also savor the moment where you have things that are completely unexpected, just because you took a step that led you to things that you could not even foresee, but that you really enjoy. So I'm just gonna give you an example. I was very I'm passionate about diversity and inclusion. And we had elections in France a couple of years ago, and my French representative came to visit us in San Francisco, where I live, and he met with us, and I talked about it. A few months later, there is an opportunity from the government to reach out to the constituents and say, hey, what do you think we should do to improve diversity, more gender equality, not diversity, but gender equality in France? And so he knocked on my door and said, hey, when you're passionate about a topic, why don't you write a report for us, not just you, but also lead a group of experts. You seem to be connected with a lot of people who know about this stuff, so which we did. And not only that, but he liked my recommendations. So he made me present to the Minister of Gender Equality and Women's Rights in France. Not only that, introduced me to the French Parliament person who was leading the effort to bring more women in science in France, which I did. And then the person who is managing the task force for AI in France. And you never know what your passion is bringing you. So I would say just savor those moments, go for the exciting stuff, and if you really connect to your passion, you'll get opportunities. If you talk about your passion, people will connect to you, people will bring you problems to resolve, and if you contribute, then they'll bring you more, and you will be more and more in positions to influence towards, the goals that you're trying to achieve. So.
Well, I would just say to avoid burnout. I mean, I get my energy from the people around me, and some great colleagues sitting in the room today that bring the passion that we all have for the topic, and you just feel like, okay, well, I'm a little ant in the whole scheme of things, but eventually we ants get together and we make mountains move, So it's just that it's like it's a cause that I feel personally connected to, and I feel and I see the impact it has on some of the fantastic leadership around me, and the female leadership especially, and it just gives me energy.
I was going to practice self-control and not answer every question, but she handed me the mic.
Do it.
So luckily, because I always have something to say, whether it's useful or not is different. The SCARF model, that F of fairness, the fact that this seems so unfair to me, I have constant drive to address this topic. But in those rare occasions when I get a little sad, all I do is call up somebody who I was an advocate for, who I sponsored, or somebody of a different group who I helped get a job. I just call them up and say, how you doing? And usually they're in a really good spot and they have something to say. And it just reminds me of why we do this, because it's an individual by individual basis, can really make a difference.
That's good. That's good. It's almost, from even what Nolan said and what you all said, it's like a baton race. You have to think about it generationally, just one step at a time. That's good. All right. Well, if you guys would join me, we want to thank our panel. So we had Laura Preslin from Microsoft, Jennifer Brown from Medtronic, Kalpana Sundar from PayPal, and Nolan Goddard from PayPal. Thank you guys so much. We're excited for the 4th annual Infusion next year. We're going to keep this going. And thank you guys for choosing to attend. We hope you got something from it, some idea. And if you have further questions, again, if you would like the deck, feel free to email me at michael@pricingsociety.com. Or if you need any contact information, I know they're more than willing to chat through LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out or use the app. There's a shameless plug for the app. You can contact all of us on the app as well. All right, we have a few minutes, so you guys can finish eating, but sessions start back up in about 7 minutes. And thank you all for coming. Have a great day.